There comes a moment in every inner journey when action becomes noise, and noise becomes the mask of fear. We chase, we strive, we fix, and still, something within remains unsettled. This restlessness is not a flaw, but a signal, a call to stop, not out of defeat, but of deeper wisdom. What if the path to clarity was not forged by force, but by surrender? What if, just once, you did nothing and watched everything fall into place? We have been conditioned from birth to believe that movement equates to meaning, that productivity is proof of worth, and that unless we are constantly striving, pushing, and achieving, we are somehow falling behind. This idea has taken root so deeply within our collective psyche that the very notion of stopping, to simply exist, to allow rather than act, feels foreign, even dangerous. But the truth is that this endless need to do, to fix, to plan, is not born from strength, but from fear. The ego, that part of us which craves identity and control, is terrified of silence, of not having something to prove itself through. So it compels us to keep moving, even when our movements are frantic, directionless, or disconnected from our deeper truth. It whispers that if we stop, we will fall apart, that the world will forget us, that our worth will evaporate like mist. And yet, it is precisely in those moments when we dare to stop, when we resist the compulsion to act for the sake of acting, that we begin to encounter something much more profound. The self beneath the noise, the self that does not require constant validation or proof to exist. The ego survives on repetition, routine, and reinforcement, but the soul speaks in silence, in gaps, in stillness. When we refuse to do simply because doing is expected, when we resist the addiction to urgency, we begin to dissolve the illusions that have shaped our identities. We start to realize that not every problem needs an immediate solution, that not every emotion demands a reaction, that not every thought deserves to be acted upon. This is not about becoming passive or disengaged from life. It is about stepping out of the illusion that everything must be orchestrated by our will. In truth, many of the deepest, most life-altering transformations happen not through effort, but through surrender. And this surrender is not weakness, it is a radical act of trust. Trust in something greater than your own control mechanisms. Trust that the psyche, when left undisturbed, can find its own way home. Trust that your unconscious knows how to guide you toward integration if you stop interfering with its process. This kind of stillness is not inert, it is deeply active, but in a way that transcends physical movement. It is the stillness of deep water, not shallow stagnation. There is a sacred power in stepping back and allowing life to unfold without you forcing its petals open. When you stop trying to manage every outcome, you create space for truth to emerge, for clarity to settle like dust after the storm. It is in this pause that your real power begins to gather, not as a projection of the ego's desire to control, but as the magnetic force of authenticity. And yet, this path is not easy. It requires unlearning what the world has taught you about urgency, success, and self-worth. It requires the courage to confront the discomfort that arises when you are not doing, when you are not chasing. But if you stay with that discomfort, if you remain present to the silence that follows, you will begin to hear the voice that has been drowned out by your own activity. And this voice does not shout, it whispers. It tells you that you were never broken, that you never had to earn peace through exhaustion, that your presence is enough. And when this truth finally begins to settle in your bones, you will no longer fear the pause. You will welcome it as a return, as a remembering, as the moment everything that matters finally begins to fall into place. Beneath the surface of what we consciously understand, beneath the thoughts we form and the choices we believe we make with free will, there exists a vast and powerful force. The unconscious. It is not a place of mere forgotten memories or repressed emotions, as many assume. It is a living, breathing intelligence that shapes our reality in ways the waking mind can scarcely comprehend. The unconscious is like a deep ocean, and most people are content to swim near the surface, unaware that the true currents pulling at their lives come from far below. This is why silence, stillness, and the act of doing nothing becomes so vital. It creates the condition necessary for this deeper intelligence to rise, to be heard, to be felt. When we are constantly busy, constantly planning and fixing and thinking, we drown out the subtle voice of the unconscious. Our activity becomes a form of resistance, a distraction from what is really trying to emerge within us. And yet, when we stop and allow ourselves to be still, we enter into a sacred state where the unconscious begins to move on its own, not in chaos, but in quiet orchestration. Dreams come alive with symbols that speak in a language older than words. Synchronicities begin to show us that not all events are random, and emotions we have buried begin to surface not to torment us, but to integrate and teach. In this state of sacred inaction, we are no longer imposing our will upon life. We are surrendering to a deeper rhythm that has always been there, waiting for us to listen. And it is not a passive surrender. It is an awakening to a more profound intelligence within ourselves that does not operate through logic or strategy, but through meaning, myth, and metaphor. The unconscious communicates in images, in feelings, in patterns that cannot be grasped when we are too focused on controlling or fixing what we think is broken. Often, what we see as broken is only in transition, only in the process of realignment, and our intervention, though well-intentioned, only delays the completion of a cycle that was meant to unfold naturally. By doing nothing, we are not turning our backs on life. We are stepping out of the way so life can do its deeper work within us. This work is subtle, invisible, and sometimes painful, but it is always wise. We must learn to respect the silence of the unconscious, the slow unfurling of inner change that cannot be forced into a timeline. This requires patience, trust, and a deep willingness to let go of the illusion that we are the sole authors of our journey. We are not passive observers either. We are co-creators, with forces within us that we have yet to fully meet. Stillness gives them the space to speak. And the moment we stop trying to dominate our inner world with plans and expectations, the unconscious responds by revealing what has been hidden. Traumas that need healing, patterns that need breaking, gifts that need reclaiming. It begins to reshape our reality, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. That is why doing nothing is not a retreat from power, it is a return to real power. The power that arises not from force, but from integration, not from effort, but from alignment. When we learn to live in partnership with the unconscious, we stop trying to chase clarity and begin to embody it. And in this embodied clarity, everything begins to fall into place, not because we made it happen, but because we finally stopped getting in the way of the deeper wisdom that was trying to guide us all along. To do nothing is perhaps the most misunderstood act of all, for it is not truly doing nothing. It is an act of radical trust, a profound surrender into the invisible order of things that the conscious mind cannot fully grasp. Most people live under the illusion that their willpower alone shapes reality, that through constant control and endless striving, they can bend life to their desires, but the deeper layers of the psyche know otherwise. There is an intelligence within the fabric of existence that cannot be pushed or manipulated, only partnered with, and this intelligence does not respond to noise, but to quiet, not to demand, but to receptivity. When one chooses to stop forcing outcomes and instead leans into the unknown with open hands. It is not passivity, it is alignment. This kind of trust is the foundation of true transformation. The inner stance that allows events, people, and energies to move according to their natural rhythm, rather than the artificial structure imposed by fear or impatience. When you trust deeply, you do not abandon intention, but you cease to obsess over how, when, or in what form things should arrive. Trust creates space. It invites synchronicity. It aligns you with the unfolding of your path, rather than locking you into a narrow expectation. When you are in this state of sacred trust, you stop resisting the present moment and begin to move with it. Like a leaf that doesn't struggle against the river's current, but lets itself be carried while still remaining whole. This is the essence of inner maturity, to know when to act and when to allow, to recognize that life does not always need your interference to deliver what is yours. The need to control is born from the fear that nothing will come unless you force it, but in truth, what is meant for you cannot be taken, delayed, or denied when you are aligned with your deeper self. Trust is not a concept to be recited, it is a lived experience, an embodiment of presence so full that the future no longer feels like something to conquer, but something to receive. In this space, your nervous system softens, your heart opens, and the mind begins to quiet, because it senses that there is no longer a war to fight, no identity to prove, no reality to chase. Doing nothing becomes an act of listening. You begin to notice how life speaks to you, not with dramatic events, but with gentle signs, subtle shifts, quiet invitations. The more you trust, the more you see that everything has its own timing, and that your anxious attempts to speed things up often only create more delay. There is a rhythm to your healing, a timing to your becoming, a path that only reveals itself step by step when you are no longer trying to outrun your own unfolding. The paradox is that by doing nothing, by trusting, you actually become more available to life, more tuned to what truly matters. You no longer need to grasp, to beg, to chase, because you start to feel, deep in your bones, that what is meant for you will find you, not because you controlled it, but because you became the person who could hold it. This is the power of sacred trust, the quiet confidence that allows you to meet each moment without resistance, to release what no longer serves, to welcome what arrives, and to walk forward without forcing your way. In this state, you do not shrink or retreat. You expand into a life that begins to organize itself around the truth of who you really are, without you needing to make it happen through exhaustion or fear. Solitude, when chosen consciously, is not isolation, but a return to the center of your being, where truth lives, unfiltered and undisturbed by the noise of the world. Most people fear being alone not because solitude is painful, but because it strips away all the distractions they've used to avoid meeting themselves. The world teaches us to seek constant connection, external affirmation, and noise to feel alive. But in doing so, we lose the ability to hear the voice that whispers beneath the surface of our thoughts. When you step into solitude, without running, without trying to fill the silence, you enter a sacred space where the layers of your identity begin to dissolve, not in despair, but in clarity. Here there is no audience to impress, no role to maintain, no expectations to fulfill, and what is left is the raw, unguarded self that has always waited to be seen. It is in this space that the soul begins to speak in its natural language, a language of sensation, memory, silence, and image, a language that cannot be heard in the crowded chambers of a busy life. Solitude recalibrates you by stripping away the false and drawing forth the essential. It is where old wounds rise not to punish you, but to be met with the presence they were once denied. It is where grief that has long been buried begins to flow like a river that finally found its mouth. It is where forgotten desires begin to stir again, quiet at first, like embers beneath ashes, but ready to burn once more with direction and purpose. In solitude, the persona, the social mask, loosens its grip, and beneath it, the shadow begins to reveal itself, not as an enemy, but as a part of you that has lived in exile. Without the usual distractions, you are forced to witness your own contradictions, your fragmented longings, your unresolved stories, and it is this witnessing that begins the healing process. Not judgment, not analysis, but gentle, honest observation. You learn to sit with discomfort without immediately reaching for escape, and in doing so, you build a kind of inner resilience that cannot be learned in the presence of others. The courage to remain with yourself, fully and without embellishment, is one of the most transformative choices you can make. Solitude invites integration. It gives the psyche space to breathe, to rearrange, to reorient toward wholeness. It allows scattered energies to return home, fragmented identities to merge, forgotten truths to resurface. But it requires your patience. It does not rush, it does not shout. It moves in still waves, in long pauses, in the quiet unfolding of what you are finally ready to face. And the more you embrace solitude, the more you realize it is not emptiness but fullness, not absence but presence. In the beginning it may feel like loneliness, but if you remain, if you allow the silence to deepen, you will find that you are not alone at all. You are in the presence of something eternal, something untouched by external chaos. You are in communion with your soul. And from that communion arises a clarity that no book, no teacher, no relationship can give you. It is your own truth, born not from theory, but from direct experience. The kind of clarity that anchors you, that steadies your step, that guides your choices without noise. When you return from solitude, you do not return as you were. You return rooted, refined, real, not seeking the world to complete you, but ready to meet it as someone who knows who they are and who no longer fears the quiet, because they have learned that in the quiet, everything they needed was already waiting to be found. As she sat watching the world go by, something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body. Every transformation demands space, not just in the external world, but within the psyche where all true change begins. People often rush to act after moments of insight, scrambling to translate revelation into immediate motion, fearing that stillness will make the clarity fade. But what they fail to see is that integration is not something that can be forced or hurried. The psyche, like nature, moves in seasons and cycles, and has its own organic timing that does not obey the anxious demands of the ego. After a deep realization or emotional awakening, the soul needs silence, the mind needs stillness, and the body needs rest. For what has been uncovered must settle into the depths of who you are before it can bear fruit. The desire to quickly build upon a revelation is often a disguised attempt to escape its weight, to avoid sitting with the discomfort or uncertainty that it brings. Yet it is precisely in that sitting, in that seemingly unproductive space, where true transformation takes root. Integration is a mysterious process that unfolds not through effort, but through allowance. When you do nothing, when you stop interfering, you give your inner world permission to breathe, to reshape, to realign itself without the interference of premature action. This space is sacred and often uncomfortable because it strips away the illusion of control and demands your full presence with what is still becoming. You may not feel like anything is happening on the surface, but beneath your awareness, energies are shifting, old narratives are dissolving, new potentials are quietly forming. The unconscious does not announce its progress with trumpets. It speaks in dreams, in impulses, in subtle patterns that only make sense in retrospect. This is why it is so important to resist the urge to define, to finalize, to prove. When you try to force clarity before the psyche has fully processed what it has received, you distort its truth and dilute its power. Just as a seed does not sprout the moment it touches soil, your insights must be given time to root themselves in the body, the heart, and the unconscious. Doing nothing after a revelation is not laziness. It is a wise and necessary act of trust. It says, I am willing to let this unfold in its own time without my constant interference. I do not need to make something happen to validate what I've learned. I am not afraid of what arises in the space between knowing and becoming. In this way, you become a container rather than a controller. You hold space for your own evolution instead of trying to dictate it. And it is in this holding that the psyche begins to weave together the fragmented parts of you that were touched by the insight. It reorders your inner world in ways the conscious mind cannot orchestrate. You may find that clarity comes days or weeks later, not as a thought, but as a shift in how you speak, how you move, how you respond to life. This is integration. This is real change. It does not require a grand plan, only presence. And the more you honor this space, the more you learn to trust the wisdom of your own inner process. You realize that not everything valuable needs to be acted on immediately, that some of the most important movements of the soul happen in stillness. You come to see that doing nothing is not the absence of growth, but the condition in which growth becomes possible. And as you learn to rest in this in-between, as you let go of the urge to rush forward, you begin to witness how everything, slowly and silently, begins to fall into place without your need to force or chase or prove anything. There is a moment in every journey where the seeking must stop, not because the answers have all been found, but because the endless grasping begins to block the very thing you are seeking. Most people are caught in a cycle of accumulation, of knowledge, experiences, practices, even healing methods, believing that if they can just learn more, do more, feel more, they will finally arrive at some elusive state of completion. But the self is not a puzzle to be solved or a ladder to be climbed. It is a presence to be inhabited, and often the greatest barrier to inhabiting it is the ceaseless noise of inner striving. The deeper intelligence within you is not impressed by how much you know or how hard you try. It responds to spaciousness, to quiet, to a kind of inner surrender that allows what is already true to emerge without being pushed. When you stop reaching and instead soften into where you already are, you begin to see that much of your seeking was an attempt to escape what was here all along. The very peace, clarity, and meaning you were chasing was waiting not at the end of your efforts, but underneath them, in the stillness you were too afraid to enter. This stillness is not empty. It is full, dense with knowing, pregnant with insight. And when you stop moving long enough to feel it, you begin to realize that you were never far from home, only moving too fast to see it. Doing nothing becomes the doorway to true presence, and presence is not passive. It is the most active form of consciousness there is, because it requires your full being, undivided, unguarded, unhurried. In this state, things begin to unfold naturally. Answers arise not as thoughts, but as a deep inner resonance. You begin to sense what is true without needing to analyze, what is right without needing to control. Your choices flow not from fear or desire, but from alignment with something quieter and more trustworthy than either. The paradox is that by stepping back, by doing nothing, by not grasping, you actually begin to receive more, not because you earned it through effort, but because you became spacious enough to hold it. So much of what you were chasing cannot land in a cluttered system, in a heart full of noise. When you rest in being, life begins to organize itself around your inner state rather than the other way around. People sense the stillness in you. Circumstances start to mirror your clarity. The external world, once a battlefield of effort and control, begins to respond to your presence with synchronicity and grace. And all of this happens not through force, but through allowing. This is not a philosophy to be understood. It is an orientation to be lived, a posture of trust that lets you meet life not as a project to be completed, but as a mystery to be entered. When you allow yourself to do nothing, you are not giving up. You are giving in to a deeper rhythm, one that has been guiding you all along, even when you thought you were lost. You come to see that life was never asking you to be perfect, only present. That growth was never meant to be a struggle, but a return. That clarity does not come from adding more, but from removing what is in the way. And when this becomes real, in you, not as an idea, but as a lived experience, everything begins to shift, not because you changed everything, but because you stopped needing to. And in that space, the truth that was buried under layers of trying and striving finally rises into view, gentle, whole, and quietly waiting to take its place. You have been taught to conquer, but life is not a battlefield. It is a mirror, and when you stop fighting, it stops resisting. So dare to pause, dare to trust the intelligence of stillness. Let the silence speak. Let the unconscious rise. Do nothing after this, not out of apathy, but out of sacred reverence, and watch, not with expectation but with presence, as everything begins to fall into place.